Okay, welcome everybody. I appreciate you coming out today for the legislative update for the Illinois packaging EPR and bottle bills. So here's a group of us from the IRF board, made up of many different people, many different aspects of recycling, businesses, governmental agencies, universities. My name's Aaron Harmon. I'm with Midwest Fiber Recycling. I operate the MRF here. So not the normal face I'm sure you see. Marta couldn't make it today, so she asked me to fill in. So I will do my best. Also, shout out to Sue, the executive director, newer to IRF. She will be monitoring the chat today. So if you have questions, put them in the chat if you would, and we will go through those at the end. Also, just a reminder to keep yourself on mute throughout to minimize any extra noise. So the IRF purpose, the Illinois Recycling Foundation, is a 501c3 educational organization dedicated to waste reduction, reuse, recycling, and supporting markets for recycled content materials. Members from a variety of disciplines come together to seek solutions to challenges impacting this mission. We express our concerns to state agencies and political leadership when necessary. We welcome members of industry, government, educational institutions, and nonprofits that share our goals. As always, the more that join, the better. So we are 40 years as a collaborative voice of recycling Illinois. All members attend webinars free of charge, no fees for job postings or employees attending webinars. All members are listed on the website directory. Monthly emails cover current topics impacting recycling. The newsletter features at least one member, and member activities are highlighted in social media. Also, members are members of the National Recycling Coalition. So if you're a member of the IRF, you're also a member of the National Recycling Coalition. I'd like to thank our sponsor today for the presentation, the Can Manufacturing Institute. So the Can Manufacturers Institute, CMI, is the national trade association of the metal can manufacturing industry and its suppliers in the United States. CMI is committed to fostering the prosperity of the metal can industry and engaging in initiatives to solidify the can as a superior, sustainable package. The can industry accounts for the annual domestic production of approximately 131.6 billion food, beverage, aerosol, and general line cans. It employs more than 28,000 people with plants in 33 states, Puerto Rico, and American Samoa. It generates about $15.7 billion in direct economic activity. So again, thank you for the Can Manufacturers Institute for supporting today's webinar. All right, the agenda for today is a presentation by Christina Siebert on the packaging EPR bill. Following that is Mike Samaha on the recycling refund bill, and then Scott D. Fife on the glass perspective. After the three presentations are done, we'll talk about a couple IRF programs coming up and then go into question and answer. First up today, Christina Siebert. She is the Executive Director for the Solid Waste Agency of Northern Cook County, also known as SWANCC, an intergovernmental agency comprised of 23 municipalities in North and Northwest Cook County. Christina has 21 years of experience in the solid waste and recycling arena, advising both units of local government and private waste companies on planning, policy, program, and contract matters. She's led market assessments, economic evaluations, solid waste and recycling plans, and facility development and permitting efforts for all types of waste and recycling facilities. In addition to extensive experience across the Chicago market and Northern Illinois, Christina has also worked with communities across the U.S., including many with aggressive diversion goals and progressive environmental policies such as Los Angeles and Austin, Texas. Christina is a current vice president of the Illinois chapter of SWANA and has served in the SWANA board since 2005. She is a certified faculty for SWANA's international training courses, managing integrated waste, solid waste management systems, which she authored, and zero waste principles and practices. She's also the chair of the Illinois Electronics Recycling Task Force, and along with Mary Allen, co-authored the Recycling Works Toolkit and conducted training workshops across the state for Illinois Recycling Association. She has a Bachelor's of Science degree in Environmental Science from the University of Iowa, and her contact information is there at the bottom. So thank you, Christina, and I will pass it over to you.
Thank you, Aaron. As Aaron introduced me there, I'm here to talk today about the EPR for packaging bill. This is introduced in the Senate as Senate Bill 1555, and in the House as House Bill 2874. We are excited that both of those bills moved out of committee last week, but we are holding them on second reading, pending bringing back an amendment to both committees. So today I'm going to go over some of the basic components of the bill and our process getting to this point, and then I'll cover some next steps for our core group as well as the stakeholder groups that we've engaged through the process, and be happy to answer questions at the end. This is a pretty big bill, so it's going to be a lot of information. I know some of you have heard this before through either other presentations that we have provided for IRF or through other organizations that you're part of. We have been trying to spread the word and bring up the knowledge base around packaging EPR within the state. Go ahead and go to the next slide, Aaron. So the bill development really started with our core team, which was a group that is comprised of folks from the Illinois Product Stewardship Council. Includes Walter Willis and Mike Grady from Solid Waste Agency of Lake County, myself and Taylor Anderson, our lobbyist at Swank, the city of Chicago, and DuPage County. And we funded the work around bill development to this point. We retained the services of the Product Stewardship Institute to help guide us through some framework discussions. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So PSI helped us pull together the framework elements of the bill, and we included this policy development committee, which was comprised of representatives from environmental associations, from the Illinois EPA, many different segments of local government, from municipal to county to councils of government, and Representative Dagmara Avalar from the U.S. or from the Illinois House was also involved. So she had introduced a bill last year. And when she introduced that, it was known that it would be just kind of a placeholder, and we engaged her in conversation to help develop the starting point of our bill here in Illinois. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So we had a number of framework sessions with that initial group, and then once we had a draft bill, we started to hold stakeholder meetings with other organizations, including a number of different trade associations, the haulers and MRF operators, various environmental groups, local government groups, and other entities, both in the state and nationally. So we've had some conversations with each of these entities and others since the bill was filed, and we expect that we're going to continue working with these folks to prepare an amendment on the bill. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So, and this building support, we've really rippled out, and it's been a 16-month process getting to today. I don't need to dwell on where we are because we're just going to keep talking about this. So go ahead and go to the next slide. So what is EPR for packaging? It's a law that requires companies, what we refer to as producers, to pay for the collection and processing of their packaging and paper products. We have other EPR bills that are in place in Illinois. We have an electronics law. We have a newly adopted drug take-back law that will get fully stood up and operating next year. So we have experience. We've seen how these programs can work in the state. This one just happens to be a bit larger and touch more materials in a more comprehensive way than those previous EPR programs have. The table of items, the table of items here are the 16 elements that we worked on with PSI and with our initial policy development committee to talk through and build the bones of the law, and it covers everything from definitions around what is covered, who is covered, what are the performance standards to be met, how will funding be provided, what are the timelines and targets and trigger periods for any kind of penalties. So all of this gets incorporated into the bill as PSI had drafted it. Going from the version that was drafted from PSI to the version that was filed was there were some pretty substantial changes as we started to address stakeholder concerns. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So why do we need this law? Recycling is complex, it's costly. Local governments have really taken responsibility along with the material recovery facilities, the recycling processors, to manage the materials that are generated by our residents and by our businesses. We don't have control over what those materials are. Those are put into the marketplace by the producers. The producers know what types of materials they're producing, but they don't always have reason to think about the end of life management of that product. So a lot of those packaging items are ending up in landfills because they're not able to be easily recovered within the recycling system we have today. And the investment that would be required by the MRFs or the technological capability isn't there to be able to capture those materials. Local governments are left with making decisions about what we can afford to expend on these systems and what we can ask our residents to fund. And then the residents are confused about what's recyclable and what's not. So we're seeing a lot of contamination in the recycling stream because of that confusion. And lastly, we have several parts of Illinois that don't have any opportunity to recycle, or they have very challenging opportunities to recycle. They don't have access to curbside recycling. They don't have local drop-offs that are available. So through the EPR for packaging law, the costs become shifted to those producers who are making those packaging decisions, with the expectation that it would incentivize them to reduce unnecessary or duplicative packaging, to make shifts away from non-recyclable packaging materials and to develop packaging that is going to be more recoverable, more recyclable, and more sustainable, all of which is a benefit to the environment, and we believe would be a benefit to the producers as well, because also they're going to have a recovery mechanism to bring those materials back to production of new packages, reducing reliance on virgin materials. It also requires producers would provide access to recycling for all the residents of the state, all of the K through 12 public and private schools, public spaces, and local governments. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So the benefits, the environmental benefits, we're reducing our greenhouse gas emissions, we're reducing the use of virgin resource materials for new products. That reduction of greenhouse gas emissions really depends on making sure that we have efficient collection systems in place, in addition to the value of being able to reclaim and recover materials and avoid that mining of new virgin resources. And it requires that recycled materials are incorporated into new products. So there are requirements for post-consumer recycled content to be used in new packages, which stimulates and supports the circular economy, ensuring that those materials that the MRFs are recovering do have an outlet and a market. Economic benefits, as I said, would reduce the costs to local governments, reduces costs to residents for collection and processing for their recycling, without any loss of level of service or the authority to be able to select the haulers that we work with. So as local government, that's an important consideration for us, because we need to balance the need for sanitation services and for making sure that we don't have a overabundance of trucks on the street and inefficient operations running around our towns. Our trash and recycling haulers are most in contact with our residents out of anyone that we work with, including police and fire, because they drive past your house every week. Recycling creates jobs. It creates 9 times as many jobs as disposal for the same amount of tonnage. And the MRFs will have financial support to be able to improve their equipment and increase their capacity. So that's been a market decision that they have made over time. What can the market bear with the partnering or the knowledge that they would gain from working with producers to provide the processing? There will be increased tolerance and willingness, we believe, to invest in additional infrastructure to be able to capture more materials or capture materials more efficiently. And then finally, this will expand recycling to all residents. There are environmental justice concerns that must be addressed through the needs assessment and the program plans, and those are continuing to evolve. We'll likely have additional requirements placed on that through discussion of an amendment. And then there's required education and outreach that would be performed and funded by the producers. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So what are the covered materials? It's basically all consumer packaging and printed paper. Everything that can go in your curbside recycling cart now, for those who have curbside recycling, as well as other packaging like materials that are include single-use products like plastic utensils, plastic cups, straws, any different materials that are used in those single-use lines that would be covered. So in addition to those that go into the cart now, it also includes all of the packaging that can't go into our carts. So things like plastic bags, flexible food pouches, plastic film would all be included as covered materials. Go ahead and go to the next slide. The Producer Responsibility Organization, the collective of producers, will work to develop a minimum list of readily recyclable materials annually, and they will work with the advisory council that will be set up to establish that list. So that list becomes the list that all collectors must collect and manage in order to be included in the program. That ensures that we are continually looking at what the technological capabilities are and advancing those to be able to recover more materials. And for any of the materials that are in the bill that are not on the list of readily recyclable materials, the producers must identify how those will be collected and recycled. So they may have separate segregated drop-off programs or other alternative collection programs that would be run for those. Go ahead and go to the next slide. Covered entities, as I've said, single and multifamily residences, public and private K through 12 schools, state and local government agencies, and public spaces. So not only is there expansion in service across state, but also the segments that we have a hard time reaching now as local government, namely the multifamily residences, would see an increased level of service through this program. Next slide. So on collection and convenience, as I said, everything on the statewide list would have to be collected, and that access to recycling is going to be stood up within the first 3 years of program implementation. So where the population of a community is greater than 1,500, you would be given curbside recycling. Where the population is less than 1,500, there has to be at least one drop off within 15 miles of the municipal boundary. That curbside recycling service would be at a minimum of every other week collection. And where we have programs in place now, there's no backsliding. So wherever we have curbside recycling now, or communities that choose to contract for curbside recycling in the future, regardless of whether they're over 1,500 population or not, they would have curbside recycling. And if we have weekly recycling now, it would continue to be performed weekly. So much of the Chicago region does use a weekly recycling collection. Downstate areas tend to be more likely to go to a bi-weekly collection. Next slide. The responsible party, or the producer, is an important consideration. This is who funds the system, so we need to be clear on what this definition is. For consumer brands that manufacture their own products, they're going to be the responsible party. If they do not manufacture their own products and someone else manufactures it for them, but their name is on the package, then the consumer brand remains the responsible party. For retail brands, private label brands, the packaging manufacturer in those instances is the responsible party. That was a negotiated definition with the Illinois Retail Merchants Association. We have heard a lot of concern from various stakeholders around that definition because it is, it feels like it's a carve out or complication within the understanding of the funding system. So the retailers are not exempted from funding the program. They still would be likely charged through their packaging manufacturer, but it becomes a less direct influence to their packaging choice. So we believe that this would still result in the system being fully funded. No package is exempt, but it changes who writes the check. For international products, the first importer or distributor of the product is the producer. And then for shipping packaging, the manufacturer of the shipping packaging is the producer, similar to that retailer difference. And the package, the product that is contained inside the package is still the responsibility of whoever that product packaging producer is. So if you're ordering from Amazon and you are ordering a bottle of shampoo, the shampoo consumer brand is the packager for the bottle, but the box and any shipping material is the packaging manufacturer who manufactures that for Amazon. So there are exemptions and exclusions for governments, municipalities, nonprofits, and small businesses from being defined as a producer. Those are all spelled out in the bill. Next slide. The governance and oversight on this, there's really 3 different groups that are responsible. So the producers would act individually, or they would form a producer responsibility organization, which would be a nonprofit 501c3 organization. They are responsible for doing the funding the needs assessment component, preparing their program plan, funding all of the programs, and reimbursing costs for collection and processing, as well as meeting the education requirements and other stipulations of the bill. The IEPA has oversight and enforcement authority, so they review and approve all program plans and annual reports, and they facilitate public engagement. And then there's a multi-stakeholder advisory council, which would be appointed by IEPA, whose members are identified in the bill. That group provides non-binding guidance to the PRO and to IEPA on the needs assessment, on the list of minimum recyclable materials, on the annual reports and the program plans. All of those written recommendations and responses would be addressed by the PRO in their filings. And then the advisory council would be granted the authority to appeal to the Illinois Pollution Control Board if there is a majority vote among the advisory council to do so on any decisions of the IEPA or the PRO that they feel are not in keeping with the requirements of the law. That was a provision that was suggested for inclusion by IEPA in order to address certain limitations or challenges in their interpretation of bills and authority with respect to making subjective judgments on acceptability of plans. Next slide. So the funding, the producers pay the fees to the PRO. That's based on certain environmental criteria we'll talk about in a second here. There's incentives and disincentives built into that funding. So all covered materials end up paying fees. And if you're a small producer, you pay a flat fee. So you don't need to track your quantities as closely other than to ensure that you're within that threshold for small producers. Next slide. So the fee schedule is based on eco-modulated fees. These are fees that are designed to encourage attributes of the material that would reduce environmental and human health impacts. So things like improving the recyclability or the reusability of products, being designed to reduce impacts across the life cycle, incorporating renewably sourced material and sustainably sourced material, eliminating toxic substances, incorporating PCR content. All of those aspects would be set into those fees so that the most recyclable and easily recovered and reusable packaging types would pay a lower amount per unit than those that don't have a recycling option or that are challenging and costly to collect and recycle, really incentivizing that decision towards the recoverable and recyclable materials. And any reusable containers would be exempt from fees. So we'd also like to see more of a reuse system develop where it's appropriate for certain materials and certain packaging types. By exempting those from fees, we think that will incentivize the producers to look at standing up those programs. Next slide. Covered costs, we've pretty well been over. The PRO will cover the statewide needs assessment, which provides baseline data on our existing programs and existing infrastructure. They'll cover all the recycling system costs, including collection, processing, marketing, and disposing of contamination. They would provide infrastructure investments to expand our capacity for recycling and reuse and composting. They provide education, outreach, market development service, and administrative costs for IEPA. Next slide. Protecting existing infrastructure was something important to us in developing the bill, and it's certainly of concern for the waste industry, the recycling industry. because there's millions of dollars of investment that have been made in Illinois to this infrastructure. So the needs assessment will identify that current infrastructure and capacity and any capital improvements that are needed or investments that are needed to develop new infrastructure or expand existing infrastructure. And then in the program plan, the PRO will identify how they're going to work with the existing service providers and make those investments. Municipalities are given the authority to continue their existing recycling contracts and to continue selecting who they contract with for recycling services and then be reimbursed by the PRO for those costs. And the bill does preclude the producers from owning collection and processing assets. Next slide. There are education requirements and funding that's required to be provided, and it's specified in a certain amount in the bill. The education will drive more participation in recycling, and there's an opportunity for counties and joint action agencies to get half of the funding that is allocated to their jurisdiction population to support that education. So we can tailor things to our local market and be in partnership with the producers in spreading the word and incentivizing their recycling participation. Next slide. There are a couple of special programs that are set up and funds that are in the bill: waste prevention and reuse program and a composting infrastructure and education program. Both of these would be funded at $10 million per year, or 2.5% of total program expenditures, and be set up to be granted, loaned, or used directly by the PRO to support those waste prevention and reuse programs, things like standing up reuse and refill systems, or assisting in developing the composting infrastructure, because compostable packaging would be paying into the system, but our infrastructure isn't currently as advanced to be able to manage that. So providing specific funding to be able to recover that compostable packaging would be available. Next slide. The bill does set performance standards of an overall recycling rate of 45% by the end of 2030 and 50% by the end of 2035. Those are tied to the rates that were established in the statewide Materials Management Advisory Committee report to the General Assembly that was completed in 2021. That's an aggregate recycling target, so each individual material would be identified by the PRO for the individual standards to meet, ensuring that they roll up to that aggregate amount and those targets by those timeframes that are set in the bill. There's also requirements for post-consumer recycled content for rigid plastics. So rigid plastics is defined as plastic packaging that holds shape. So any kind of bottle, tub, jug, other type of plastic container, not your flexible plastic pouches. And that would be targets of 15% PCR content by 2028, going up to 50% by 2034. And there are exemptions and waiver process that's identified for any packaging that is not able to meet those standards because of specific laws around food safety or medical safety. And there would be a waiver that would be granted or applied for through IEPA. And again, in the program plan, the producers will specify the other PCR targets by material type for other types of products, including your cardboard or fiber products, metals, and glass. Next slide. So we're not the first to do this. There's legislation that's been adopted in 4 states already, and across the world, there are 40 countries in Europe and Canada, provinces across Canada that have implemented EPR for packaging. We've seen success in those established programs with recycling rates as high as 90%. All of the bills that have been enacted in the United States are all in the various processes of rule development or getting their PROs established. So none of them are fully up and running yet to have specific US experience drawn, but we don't expect there to be anything tremendously different from the experience we've seen in Europe. These consumer brands are multinational and global brands for many of them, and they have experience that they're bringing to each of their PROs. And we have a number of bills that are that were filed last year, and most have been reintroduced this year. So I don't have a current count. It's been a flurry of activity around different states with EPR for packaging bills. Next slide. My contact information is here. I would be happy to answer questions offline for anybody that wants to talk further. As I said, we did move both the bills out of committee last week, and we are going to be working with stakeholders to begin scheduling regular negotiation sessions to address concerns. We've had concerns from the environmental community. We are still working with the waste and recycling companies, and then the industry trade groups and manufacturers that represent the producers to address concerns from each of those different segments. So definitely looking to build a consensus around our bill and reach targets that are comfortable for everyone to continue moving this forward. I'll be happy to answer any questions at the end. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Christina. A lot of information there. Next up, Mike Smaha. Well, if I can get that, there we go. Is Vice President of Government Relations for the Can Manufacturing Institute, CMI, the trade association representing U.S. metal can makers and their suppliers. Based in Washington, D.C., SMAHA lobbies for the can industry at the federal and state levels, promoting the metal can as a premier, sustainable, and safe packaging for food, beverage, and household products. Mike has more than 20 years of experience in strategic communications, federal and state government lobbying, advocacy, campaign management, and coalition building. Prior to joining CMI, Smaha spent more than 9 years as a U.S. Government Affairs Director for OI Glass Incorporated, a glass container manufacturer, where he worked on recycling policies, including extended producer responsibility and container deposits. He also worked for 2 healthcare trade organizations, the largest state government-focused lobbying firm in the United States, and as a legislative aide for both the Virginia and Massachusetts state legislatures. Smaha received an undergraduate degree in political science from St. Michael's College in Vermont and a master's in policy management from Georgetown University McCourt School of Public Policy in Washington, D.C. He resides in D.C. with his wife and 2 children. So Mike, take it away.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Aaron. And I want to thank the foundation for allowing us to be here today. And we appreciate sponsoring this webinar because I think there's really interesting legislative and policy ideas being discussed in Illinois, and we're happy to be part of that conversation. So I want to talk about Illinois Senate Bill 85, a recycling refund for beverage container bill that's been reintroduced by Senator Laura Murphy. So Aaron, next slide, please. All right, just key points. Obviously, Illinois' recycling rate can always be improved. Any state's recycling rate can always be improved. So, I think there's always opportunities there. We believe that recycling refund programs can create jobs and save taxpayer money and support manufacturers here in the United States. Recycling refunds are an important incentive for consumers to recycle their empty containers that they consume away from home, either whether outdoors or on the go or in public spaces. And I think most importantly, Senate Bill 85 allows the private sector to develop the program and reduce retailer burden. And finally, as part of the larger EPR discussion around packaging and recycling, certainly a recycling refund component for beverage containers can certainly play a complementary role to increase recycling rates for these products. So next slide, please. All right, you already got the about us and the sponsorship slide, so we can skip ahead that one. But it's going to give you guys a sense of the metal can industry presence in the state. So we've got 4 members, one whose corporate headquarters is in Chicago. That's Ardagh Metal Packaging. And then we've got folks making everything from beverage cans to aerosol cans to food cans. And we're also doing research and development in the Chicagoland area as well. Next slide, please. So why is CMI passionate about recycling refunds? Well, a couple of years back, we set some pretty aggressive recycling targets and goals for aluminum beverage cans. So in 2020, the national recycling rate for aluminum cans was 45%. We're trying to get to 70% nationwide by 2030, and then 80% by 2040, and 90% by 2050. The reality is that 40% of all the recycled beverage cans that are sold were sold in the 10 deposit states. So the more recycling refund programs we could get going, either at the state level or ideally at the national level, that's how we're going to be able to hit our targets and our goals. Because the aluminum can sheet sector has invested a lot of money in producing domestic can sheet to supply the aluminum can makers. And quite frankly, we can't get enough used beverage cans to meet those investment needs. So next slide, Aaron. All right, so common benefits of recycling refunds for beverage cans, obviously higher recycling rates. They address away from home consumption. There's a litter reduction. There's cleaner material with higher scrap value, since that material is being separated from curbside collection and through a much cleaner stream. And obviously using the recycled materials reduces greenhouse gas emissions from using materials made from raw material. Next slide, please. So the higher these higher recycling rates with containers that are sold with the deposit. You know, the data shows the 10 deposit states versus the 40 non-deposit states. And quite frankly, containers that are sold with a recycling refund are much more likely to be recycled than those containers that don't have one. And quite frankly, it's all about incentivizing the consumer to do the right thing and to hold on to that container and make sure that it gets recycled. Next slide, please. All right, so at home versus on the go recycling. So as you've heard from Christina, EPR for paper and packaging is really focused on at home, at work, at school, and public space recycling is how it's envisioned in the Illinois proposal. But 30% of beverage containers are actually consumed on the go. And so again, this is about incentivizing the consumer to see a value on every can and bottle that they're purchasing. So they hold on to it and make sure it actually gets returned for recycling and not left behind either on a ball field or in a park or et cetera. All right, next slide, Aaron. So recycling refunds, obviously a lot of the benefits, much higher recycling rates. So 80% is the average beverage container recycling rate in those 10 recycling refund states. So pretty impressive rates there. Of the 40 states that don't have these programs, Minnesota has the highest rate at 49%. So you can see that gap between the highest performing state that doesn't have a recycling refund program versus the 10 that do. There's quite a gap there. And obviously we've talked about the benefits of producing clean recycled material, job creation, new business opportunities, reducing litter, conserving energy and natural resources, and reducing greenhouse gas emissions and preventing pollution from manufacturing new containers from virgin materials. So a lot of good benefits. Next slide, please. All right, so recycling rates in curbside. So the Container Recycling Institute estimated that in a best case scenario, curbside achieves a recycling rate of 38% for beverage containers. The best case scenario means 100% of residents have curbside access and that 100% of them are participating in recycling on a regular basis. But we know that's not the fact. We know, as Christina mentioned, there are large numbers of households in Illinois don't have recycling or curbside access, and not everybody is recycling on a weekly basis. So I do kind of want to touch upon the recycling scrap value. It's obviously going to be much more valuable through a segregated recycling refund stream versus what's collected through curbside. And it's all because of the contamination rates and material loss through curbside collection programs. Next slide, please. We think there's a great cost savings opportunity here for municipalities. So without deposits, 25% of beverage containers are recycled, but 70 are, and therefore, 75% are either lost to disposal or end up as litter. So we do think there's opportunities here for municipalities to save on collection costs and the processing costs of processing this material. They're also going to save on disposal costs and landfill tipping fees. They're going to save on litter collection pickup costs. collection costs from public litter bins and storm drain or waterway cleanup costs, and that there's opportunities here for municipalities to make money just from increased sales of the recyclables and this higher scrap value that they would get from those materials. All right, next slide. So why CMI interested in Illinois? Well, we think there's a great opportunity here from a political standpoint. I mean, obviously, you've got Democratic governor and Democratic legislature. You've got a strong manufacturing base and here, but not just with aluminum, but you've got plastic and glass manufacturing here as well. And there's some strong domestic end markets within Illinois. We know Governor Pritzker is interested in leading and doing big things on environmental issues. Just a couple of years back, Chicago's Street and Sanitation Commissioner, embraced the idea of a 10-cent deposit on bottles and beverage cans as a way to reduce, the mountains of plastics that are out there and all the containers that are going into landfill. And we do know that, a lot of you, local governments, as well as community activists, want to see, the consumer brands taking more responsibility for the management and collection of their products. So current recycling rates, there's always opportunities to improve. 24% of aluminum beverage cans are recycled in Illinois, 26% of glass bottles and jars, and 12% for PET bottles. So I think there's opportunities to really boost up those numbers here. All right, next slide, Aaron. So this is actually data that we got from the Container Recycling Institute, where they were taking a look at the litter around the Great Lakes. I do want to highlight that green bar there. That's Michigan, which has a recycling refund program. And the bar just to the left of that, Illinois, you compare just the amount of beverage containers that are comprised of, are making up the litter that are along the lake shores. It's pretty staggering, the benefits that recycling refunds can play. And, it kind of bears out in Michigan. So we think there's a great opportunity to reduce litter in Illinois as part of one of the benefits of the program. All right, next slide. We did a little bit of modeling and assuming, that 24% recycling rate that we sourced from Eunomia's 50 states of recycling. We estimate that nearly 2.8 billion cans are lost in those current states. So, if we can get a redemption rate of up to 90%, we'll see a pretty staggering increase in the number of used beverage cans that are collected and recycled. And we think that, the state's large population is going to be a significant driver of increasing the material in the supply chain. All right, next slide, Aaron. So Senator Laura Murphy is back with her bill. She's got 7 co-sponsors for Senate Bill 85. And Aaron, next slide, we'll get into some details around what's in the current version of Senate Bill 85. So we're looking at a 10-cent deposit for containers that are less than 24 ounces and a 15-cent deposit for containers that are 24 or larger. All beverages would be in the program except for any drugs that are regulated by the FDA. Infant formula or meal replacement liquids are not in the program. All container types are in there. Our belief is that if it packages a beverage, it should be in the program. And that also, helps to address any, consumer confusion about which kind of packaging that their drink is in, what's in the program versus what's not. We've got some pretty aggressive performance targets, 70% in 2 years and 75% recycling rates, redemption rates in 4 years, 85% in 6 years, and 90 by year 8. And that 90% would be a combination of curbside plus the redemption of the beverage containers. We think that all the deposits need to stay within the program. They would stay with the distributor and importer responsibility organization. And the timing of when this program would start up would be 3 years after the bill signed into law, or at least 3 years, all beverage containers would be required to be labeled with a refund value. The state has an important role to play in terms of enforcing the performance targets. They can impose civil and criminal penalties for program violations or redemption fraud. But we're also giving Illinois EPA $500,000 annually to help them with program oversight costs and for hiring and staffing employees to oversee the program. So we really want to make this as little impact at all, or having needing any taxpayer money for this program. So that's why we think that the distributor importer responsibility organization should pay an annual fee to Illinois EPA to help make sure that taxpayer money is not being spent on the program. All right, next slide. So the membership, it's all beverage distributors and importers who sell into the state, as well as retailers who distribute their own private labeled products. The responsibilities of the organization, they're the ones that are going to be installing, operating, and servicing any beverage container processing mechanisms, whether it's a reverse vending machine or a bag drop kind of program. And really, it's their responsibility to make sure this is easy and convenient for consumers. And we want to make sure that consumers all across the state have redemption options and access to making sure that they can participate in the program and get their refunds back. The distributor organization does own the material that's collected through the process, and they get to decide who they're going to sell it to in the end market. But I think what's importantly is right now, the organization is required to transfer to MRFs or drop-off facilities 10% of the revenue from the sale of the collected beverage containers for the first 5 years of the program. We know there's going to be a transition period, and we want to make sure that the MRFs and the drop-off facilities are getting some sort of compensation for material loss as that transition period is underway. And then finally, want the distributors to make sure that they're posting annual performance reports on the website, so the public and lawmakers can know how they're doing and if they're meeting their performance targets. And also they want to establish an advisory committee that's open to various stakeholders that would be interested in these programs to make sure there's equity and access for all communities in Illinois. Finally, the retailers have no requirements whatsoever until the organization requests permission of them to install and maintain and service a redemption option. And it can be either inside the store or it could be outside. It's up to the retailer to determine where they would want either a reverse vending machine or a bag drop bin located. And that's really the only obligation that the retailer has to do. Once they're asked by the distributor organization to participate, they just have to provide some space either inside or outside the store. And again, the organization pays for the installation, maintenance, and service of the redemption options. All right, next slide, Aaron. Stakeholder engagement, next slide. So we've just kind of a map of where the various key stakeholders are, and it reflects not just the conversations in Illinois, but the conversations at the national level. So you're seeing where a lot of the support amongst the environmental groups, container manufacturers, for the glass industry, plastics, or aluminum industry for these kinds of programs. Seeing support, of course, from Democratic lawmakers. Kind of on the neutral side, we're actually seeing the beverage brand companies themselves kind of been a neutral and quietly supportive because they've got their own goals that they need to meet. And they know they're not going to be able to hit these targets without recycling refund programs. Now, the folks who are going to be opposed to this, the waste hauling community, of course, concerned about losing the materials. The retailers concerned about having to take on too much responsibility in these programs, and then the beverage filler and beverage distributor. Those are the folks that are going to be on the ground that would be helping to run these programs. So next slide, Aaron. So we've been having a lot of ongoing stakeholder conversations with groups in Illinois to kind of talk about why we care about this, but also, and more importantly, to hear from them what their concerns are and see if there are ways that we can try to address it. So, we're trying to hit as many stakeholders as we can. And these are, again, ongoing conversations. And we obviously welcome everybody's input and feedback and amendment ideas. So Aaron, next slide. Just some of the conversations or takeaways that we've heard from the retailers. They're concerned about becoming recycling drop-off centers. If it starts with just beverage containers, does that open them up to all kinds of other materials? They are concerned about putting employees at risk or taking up employee time and managing the on-site redemption options. They don't want to have to host redemption options inside the store. They don't like being mandated and being told that they have to participate in these programs. And of course, they don't like the fact that they might not be receiving any payment for space devoted to redemption and operation of these programs. So, some solutions that we've incorporated in SB 85 and some other ideas that currently aren't in the bill. It's like I said, there's no retailer obligation unless they're contacted by the distributor organization to participate. We give them that decision to if they want the redemption option inside their store, if they want it outside. Another solution could be, perhaps they partner with other retailers and they establish or devote some space, in nearby retailer parking lots, if they can come to an arrangement with those folks. And that retailers, they do have a role to play in consumer convenience, and maybe they get compensated. Perhaps they're paid a space rental fee by the distributor organization. Just recognizing that they are having to give up something to participate in the program. And the refund could also be a store credit to encourage more consumers to go back into the store and purchase goods using a store credit kind of system. We really leave it up to the distributor organization and the retailers to kind of figure out what's going to work best for both parties. All right, next slide, Aaron. And so curbside and the MRF operators, we understand you guys have invested millions of dollars in upgrading your MRFs, and that containers can be up to 75% of the MRF value. So, I think it's that it's important to kind of start that we recognize there's going to be, a cost or a revenue loss. But again, there is that 3-year sort of setup period, which I think is, plenty of time for contracts to be renegotiated, for MRFs to figure out, how you're going to deal with the transition and kind of what a new normal might look like. And the nice thing is you've got a 3-year period where the program's going to start. It's not like a black swan event is already suddenly going to happen. There's plenty of time to prepare and plan for this. We do believe in providing, temporary or transitional funding to help the MRFs adjust their business models. And that could be through, again, that 5-year period where they get 10% of the scrap value. Or, and we're open to the idea of giving the MRFs a percentage of the recycling refund value for all the cans and bottles that are going through their MRFs, as long as the output and the quality of the material that they're processing meets the needs of the glass industry, aluminum industry, plastics industry, et cetera. So we're certainly open to other ideas to address the concerns of revenue loss by MRF operators. All right, next slide, Aaron. So I want to talk a little bit about SB 1555 and House Bill 2874. I think our big concern with this is around the definition of producer and the exemptions of retailers. And I'm really glad that hear Christina mention, that there's going to be some amendments and there's going to be a lot of stakeholder discussion about, how we can, bring the retailers back into the program in some capacity. Because if retailers were to be exempted from the program, really would make Illinois' program an outlier from a national perspective. The 4 states that passed EPR programs require the retailers to participate. And so, I think we just don't want to see Illinois, become an outlier in the national stage there. All right, Aaron, next slide. So that's it. I want to make sure you guys have my contact information. We're always happy to talk with you all and work with you on putting together some better amendment language and some changes that we can make to the bill to get in a much better position and really create a kind of program for recycling refunds that benefits everybody in Illinois. So I appreciate everybody's time. I'm happy to take questions.
All right, thank you, Mike. And for the speakers, if you wouldn't mind putting your contact information in the chat, in case somebody misses it, they can grab it later. And we will move on to Scott, who's going to talk about the glass perspective. So Scott D5 serves as president of the Glass Packaging Institute. He previously served as a vice president of governmental affairs at the Plastics Industry Association, the executive vice president of policy and governmental affairs for the National Restaurant Association, as well as in senior roles with the Securities Industry and Financial Markets Association and the American Public Power Association. For 12 years, Scott worked in the House of Representatives, congressional leadership for House Majority Leader Steny Hoyer, and for the members of the Energy and Commerce Committee, as well as for the state of Texas under Governor Ann Richards and the National Conference of State Legislators. His experience at multi levels of government and across several different industries and materials gives him a broad policy and systems perspective to support national recycling infrastructure and education. Scott also serves as the president of the Glass Recycling Foundation, a 501c3 organization created to help fill gaps in glass recycling efforts by providing matching grants for equipment that support community projects and the environment. Take it away, Scott.
Thank you very much, Aaron, and thanks for having me here. Just leave it on this slide for a minute because I want to preface some of the comments that are going to come on the next couple pages. And it looks like you got the long form of my bio. I'm going to have to shorten that up for you, going all the way back to my Texas State House days. But I am Scott DeFife. I'm the president of the Glass Packaging Institute. I've spoken with the Illinois Recycling Foundation before about glass recycling projects, and I look forward to speaking with you again. I want to start off by commending both Mike and Christina and the groups that are organized around developing those bills. It's a tough job, putting all of those provisions together, getting them down on paper, and listening to all of the conflicting interests of the different groups that really need to be considered when you're putting together something that is systemic change, right? So these are all very helpful, and I want to make sure that I preface all my comments on some concerns or thoughts about the bills that are before you with appreciation for that, and to say that the glass industry looks at all of these potential changes as possibilities for improvement that we want to try to support. And I generally, EPR, almost anything that we can do in the world of EPR or recycling refund, bottle redemption programs is going to improve the recovery of the material over the current system. And in fact, I actually think that both of these bills can work together really well to achieve the system, and that when you're considering extended producer responsibility, it's the perfect time to consider deposit return systems, because a lot of the conventional concerns from the MRF operators and the local governments that they're going to be losing revenue due to the material being shifted over to the deposit return system is mitigated by the idea that the producers are now helping to fund the overall waste management and recycling system in the first place, so that overcomes some of the revenue loss. So with that, we do have some concerns. I'll try to keep them fairly high level, and note that we have had input and continue to seek additional input with the sponsors of the bills in order to make the improvements. So let's start with the EPR. And there are many positive things. So we can go to the next slide on these two bills. We did present testimony in opposition, and I'll say largely because our concern is very similar to Mike's concern with the EPR bill. The exemption for the retailers is just unworkable. It is. I mean, there's a suggestion that it's not an exemption. Christine, I know that there's people suggesting that to you, but it really is. It pushes the obligation for a retail branded product that is exactly the same as a private sector branded product and sit on the same shelves of the retailers that are choosing to push their product into the economy, pushes that responsibility on a product manufacturer, a container manufacturer, or a packaging manufacturer. So it really is unique in the world of all the EPR bills that we have seen. Certainly doesn't exist in any of the ones that have been enacted, and haven't seen it in any other state being put forward. That is really, almost nothing else, can be done to improve it if that isn't addressed. The retailers should not be exempt from the production, being producers. Additional issues that we have raised and that we would like to see improved in here, and I'll try to keep this at a 30,000-foot level. Again, extended producer responsibility is not just, and should not be seen merely as, a way to shift the costs for the existing system from one set of taxpayers or funders to another set of payers or funders. It is an opportunity to improve the system. And there's a needs assessment, and that's very good, but there's just a lot of language connecting the future system to the existing system. And I understand that there are capital expenses that have been put into place, but really we need to see, from our perspective, more on improvement, more on quality, more on alternatives. There's language in there that really almost precludes additional separate streams of collection activity, the way that we read the language in the bill. And so the needs assessment really should be able to assess the entire system. We understand why the current system is the way it is, where local governments and taxpayers are paying for collection, and you want to minimize your taxpayer cost, and then handing the material over to the secondary markets to sort and deploy that material to secondary markets and market users. In EPR, you wipe out the differential payment system between the taxpayers and everybody else in the private sector on the secondary market. And so you are freer to explore separate streams that improve the quality and make every other element of the system easier and more efficient. And there's just a little bit too much tethering down to the existing system, and a lack of ability to improve the system overall in here. Secondly, we absolutely believe that the producers should help fund improvements, but we also believe that the service providers should meet standards, quality standards for output, and we would like to see that included in there as well. Otherwise, we appreciated some of the inclusion of the material groups and think that that's helpful. We would also suggest, as I started off the conversation, suggesting that the inclusion of a DRS inside the EPR is very timely. In fact, we're almost to the point where we're going to, based on the debate that we see going on in other states, that we're going to insist on a DRS to be included in an EPR if there's going to be a new EPR. Because we see there's just too much retail wants exempted, nobody wants to change the system. In order to get a better stream of glass, we have to rely on the deposit return. Virtually all of the facts that Mike presented in his presentation about quality improvements and recovery rates doubling, tripling, quadrupling for aluminum is also the case for glass. So we'd like to see these two things married up together. Moving forward on the bottle bill, and I concentrated on the 85, so we can go to the next slide. We are in dialogue with Mike and the groups allied to produce the bill. We're close to being able to support. We like to support bottle bills when we can. We have some concerns, some of which came up in Mike's conversation, but we're in active dialogue to try to resolve those and see if we can come to agreement. We have a problem with paying MRF operators for the volume, especially based on weight of material that ends up refund material, redemption deposit material that ends up in the waste stream. We understand the need for a transitional element, but it should not be based on inbound tons. It should be based on material that comes out, and it should be for a very distinct period of time that balances not just the lost revenue, but the savings as well. And really, this is, comes out of California. We really do not like the California financing model at all. We do not want to see it exported to other states. So it's a big issue for us. We think there's also some language in there that incentivizes distributors, beverage distributors, to switch materials inside the program, which we don't think is necessary. And we've got a little bit of concern about Mike said it's a very aggressive bill, aggressive rates, which is great. And the recycling advocates would like to see aggressive rates, but there's some triggers in there that could take the deposits up to 15 or 20 cents, which is an aggressive rates that we think are just, the rates and dates are a little high and a little steep on a curve, right? So 2 years to get to 70% when we're starting from virtually nothing is going to take some time to build that system. In addition, both bills talk about refill and reuse, and that is the system that really needs to be built. And so we need some more dedicated language devoting funds to a refill and reuse system in both the EPR and the DRS if we're going to effectively have a refill and reuse system. So those are our primary points, and I'm happy to take questions and discuss the issues at large during the rest of the time. And thanks for having me.
Yes, thank you, Scott. So let's move on real quick before the question and answer starts. A couple upcoming items with the IRF. In April, there will be an Illinois Professional Recycling Forum. We don't have a date picked yet. I'm still working with the speakers, but that will be in April. It's designed for MRF operators, corporate sustainability professionals, government recycling and sustainability, along with college and university sustainability professionals. And then going into May, composting. So those are the upcoming. If you'd like to see a webinar, reach out to us and let us know. If you'd like to speak on one, also let us know. Remember, webinars are free starting this year for members. And then also the big conference for the IRF, spring conference in June 13th and 14th. So be around the Bloomington Normal area during that time. Get signed up. And if you'd like to be a sponsor, also let us know. So GDB, celebrating 25 years paint recycling, is the initial sponsor. 15 sessions, 3-day event, awards lunch, dinner, and silent auction. Also, if you would like to be an exhibitor or a speaker, reach out to a board member as well and let us know. So again, back to in-person, the second year of in-person in June. Okay, again, thank you to all the speakers and everybody that came out today to listen. And now open up to questions. Sue, do you have a list of questions you'd like to start with?
I'm sorry, I'm looking for them. If anyone could put their questions in the chat, I can read them. I do have one. It's why a deposit requirement instead of a simple rebate of 5 cents for any beverage container returned to a redemption center, so the power the poor and lower middle class are not financially impacted by deposit at the time of purchase?
That's a great question. I guess a couple of things. So the deposit would be applied to every beverage type that's in the program. So if folks, are concerned about, the deposit being applied just to some kind of beverages, but others not, I think it's important that everything be in the program. Now, the question around 5 cents versus 10 cents, just best practices that we've seen from other states, and academic research really says that the 5 cent deposit is not high enough to incentivize and move enough consumers to hit the recycling or redemption rate targets that we're trying to achieve in Illinois. So you really do need to start with that 10 cents. Now, just keep in mind, of course, it's a refundable deposit. So the consumer, gets their money back as soon as they return that bottle for redemption. So it's not, a tax or aggressive tax on folks in Illinois.
The other one is, how does either of these bills incentivize MRFs to produce cleaner, marketable glass?
Well, the deposit system would largely take most of the glass out of the MRF stream. So we avoid that issue in general. I think there are a number of steps that MRFs can take to produce cleaner material. There's equipment that is readily available that could be added to the end of the processing stream so that the glass is devoid of 40 or 50% contamination rates before it moves to market. That's what really depresses the price of the glass commodity that's coming out of single stream. But I mean, let's just be honest. I mean, glass is processed differently than other materials at a single stream MRF. It starts broken in the truck as soon as the hydraulic press hits the back of it, and the value goes down. The value and the contamination go up. The value goes down and the contamination goes up from that point on. And so the glass commodity at most MRFs is a residual commodity. And then it's filled with 40 or 50% non-glass residue or unusable glass fragments that are in there, which then that material has to get transported to secondary processing to be cleaned up. There are cleanup systems at the back end. We have a variety of, we're doing a variety of work with other, equipment producers that have those kinds of systems that could be put on the back end that would clean up that residue before the glass goes to market. However, the deposit program largely takes the majority of your glass out of the curbside system, especially when it's as broad as the proposal in SB 85, which is all the beverages, right? 70 to 75% of glass containers are beverage containers. So you're going to, be left with some of the food jars and things of that nature that are going to happen. Now, the extended producer responsibility bills on their own could do quite well at improving the equipment that MRFs have to improve their glass streams. This is where I get into the discussion points where I say about quality measures and standards. The Glass Recycling Coalition does have a MRF certification program that is based on ISRI standards for the contamination rates and the end market availability of the material. There are end markets in Illinois and Wisconsin and Indiana that are all looking for more glass. And we have been trying to set up a separate commercial glass collection program in the Chicagoland area in order to increase the volume of material that's going back into the supply chain. So the EPR itself can help provide equipment to do it, but some of the recommendations I made related to standards are what we need to see geared up in order to ensure that the glass commodity out of the EPR system is improved.
Okay, and what states have passed bottle bills that already had an established private sector network of MRFs established based on all containers flowing to them? And says this person thought that the bottle bill states established bottle deposits before curbside recycling was established.
Yeah, Hawaii was the last state to pass a program in 2010, I believe. So yes, the majority of the current states put their programs in long before curbside or single stream recycling came into effect. So yeah, it's a challenge, but I also think there's an opportunity here. I do think that your curbside programs are going to get cleaner stream of material with some of the beverage containers recycled through a recycling refund program. And we acknowledge that there's going to be some initial revenue loss. And so, we've got some ideas that we brought to the table on ways we can try to address that. And we're always open to more ideas and feedback from the MRF operators and recycling operators in Illinois. So, we know it's Illinois could be the first state to pass a law with the existing infrastructure. So, it could be. But I do think that the opportunity is there, and if ultimately we're trying to get our recycling rates up, I think we need to look at some new policies that are going to change the status quo.
Yeah, if I can add a little bit, Washington had an EPR bill that had a DRS in it. It was advanced fairly far, was set aside last week, so it's not going to be considered in 2023, but it'll come back in 2024. There are other states that are considering expanding their bottle bill system while they do EPR. And yes, there has not been one since Hawaii. There's many reasons for that, and we don't need to go into all of them here. But the advent of extended producer responsibility systems that are largely focused on residential streams is a perfect opportunity to revisit a 21st century, modernized, cleaned up, more efficient DRS system, and put those two things together in order to overcome the problems, like I said, of the concerns from the counties and the MRF zone lost revenue due to the deposit material.
Aaron, I don't have any more questions if you want to move on.
I have a question for Mike, maybe. With the deposit return system, how would the redemption centers be keeping all of the material segregated, or will it have to go on for processing and segregation? I think to the point of, will the glass be protected? Will there be reduced demand or shift in demand on processing capacity? Or is there some need to still move material to a processing facility to segregate all those different types? Because you're going to have, especially taking flexibles and everything else, you're going to have a number of different material streams coming in through those redemption centers.
No, you're exactly right, Christina. And that's why you are going to need processing investment and capacity in Illinois. Just because, the bottles are in a much better state, they're less broken, but even if the glass bottles do break, if they're just mixing with the other kinds of materials, there's that contamination rate is going to be reduced, unless you are putting it all into a single stream bin and then into a recycling truck. So there is going to be a need for processing, but again, the distributor organization, they're the ones that are going to be holding on to that material and then getting it out to the processors and to the end markets for further cleanup.
And then a second question.
Sorry.
I'm gonna ask a second question, and then
Yep.
sorry. The deposit applies to all beverages. So juice boxes, 10 cents per juice box in a 10-pack case. So $1 extra on our 10-pack of juice boxes the kids will blow through in a day, and gallon of milk, gallon of orange juice, all of it, those will have that same 10 cent, or I guess in the gallon case, it'll be a 15 cent deposit.
That's correct.
Okay.
So all beverage containers are in the program, with some minimal exemptions, obviously. You're going back to the question about 5 cents versus 10 cents. That's why the importance of having, as much consumer convenience and redemption opportunities as possible throughout the state is really going to be important, because there is an equity issue there. So we just want to make sure that families in all parts of the state have options that are easy to get to redeem all of their materials.
If I can add a little bit, I mean, we're a little concerned about the flexible film packs being in the system, but I believe the recommendation there is for some equal treatment for all beverage, on the go beverage containers, right? All the end markets eventually have to have some sort of processing that goes along with it. However, the processing efficiency is tremendously increased by the lack of contamination in the stream. DRS, deposit return systems, can at least triple, if not quadruple, the recovery rate and recycling rate for glass containers in a state compared to curbside, because of the incentive to bring the material back. And the material has a 99% efficiency of being made back into new bottles and jars, as compared to an under 50% efficiency for material that's collected at the curb due to the contamination levels and the really just over processing, over crushing the glass when it's mixed in with other materials. So I thought I saw a question in the chat also about how the glass comes out of the MRF stream with a deposit system, and I tried to answer that, but largely if you're taking 75% of the glass that's in the beverage containers, and that means the wine and the spirits bottles as well, and moving them to a separate collection system, you're taking that volume of material out of the waste stream and out of the recycling stream.
There is a question in the EPR bill, the eco-modulated fees list eliminating toxic chemicals from the packaging as one of the criteria for the fees. Is there a list of toxic chemicals in the bill?
There isn't. We had originally had a provision in the bill that would have included a list of toxic chemicals, and in discussions with some of the stakeholders decided that that belongs in a different and separate bill of its own, or can be, the state already has toxicity reduction and packaging provisions on the books that could be amended if that's not strong enough. So while it would still be a criteria in the eco-modulation of fees, that would be defined by the producers in terms of what those specific toxics would be and how they would rank those for their value or their cost to the system.
I have a question. I think, Mike, you had mentioned MRFs will get 10% for the first 5 years. And Scott, it sounded like you weren't for MRFs, getting reimbursed with a bottle bill, I think mainly because of the glass, it's contaminated in a MRF. But just curious, I think, Scott, is where did the 10% come from, with Hawaii being the only state that's done this? Like, where did that 10% come from? Because as a MRF has to adjust, their contracts and stuff, I don't know that they would know what to adjust for. I don't know what they would know what the future held. What's the composition of it going to be? Are they going to lose 90% of the beverage containers that they get now? Are they going to lose 10%? Is it going to cause more recycling? So they would actually gain some back they didn't have before. But I'm just curious where that data came from. 10%, what does that represent, money wise, as they try and do this adjustment, that they're somewhat adjusting a little bit in the blue, and some contracts may not come up in that amount of time. And I think your municipalities and other suppliers will have to adjust as well, how many trucks they have on the road to pick up recycling and that sort of thing.
So the 10% was a figure that we came up with from conversations with the distributors, who want to make sure that as much of that unredeemed deposit stays within the program. So if you're going above 10%, that's additional costs that the beverage distributors have to pay. But I also say that, we'd want to sit down with you guys, and if there's a figure that might, work better, or if there's some other, calculations in there that we aren't considering, we'd like to learn more. We're not MRF operators, we're aluminum can makers. So I think there's there's an opportunity for the waste hauling and MRF community to kind of come to the table and start having some discussions around ways that we can address, or other tactics we can take to address revenue loss.
My comments on the California system are really, it's just really, no one should duplicate the California financial model at all. That payment to curbside volume is based on inbound tons, not outbound tons. So they get to charge, they get not only the, they still, anything that's in the recycling stream for the curbside MRF operators in California, they get paid for. They get paid to pick it up. They get paid to move it from point to point. They get paid for the processing of the value of the material that gets sent to the end market. And then they get the commodity value of the material that they send to the end market. They also get the refund value, which is where we just, have to draw the line. And they've been getting it for over 20 years. And is literally draining funds away from the California redemption system that are needed to make the system more efficient and friendly for consumers, more easy to redeem. All of that money needs to be going back into reinforcing the redemption system, the convenience of the system, and adding to the convenience of the system to get the material out of the stream in the first place. There's also probably a 40 to 50% yield loss for the glass that goes in compared to the glass that comes out of a lot of the MRFs in California, where we have contamination rates above 50% on average. So it's just a really, it's a poor system, poor financial system built on a system without any accountability for the folks that are operating some of the material recovery facilities out in California. Now, that is not to say that those are the same quality of activity that's going on in Illinois, but that's the system that they're trying to export, and that's where we have an issue with it. It needs to be, we were able to support a provision in the Washington bill that allowed for a transition period for counties and MRFs together to give a report into the state that says, here's our revenue loss, here's our offsetting savings from not moving material to landfill and not having as much material in the stream from a county perspective. You put those two budget line items together rather than keeping them separate, right? The system helps pay for the material that's diverted, but also, helps. There's revenue loss from material commodity sales, but there's also savings from less material going to landfill tip fees. You put those two things together in a transition time that's overseen by the state environmental department, and we were able to support a system like that.
Okay. Are there any other questions out there before we end? All right, again, I'd like to thank everybody. I thank all the speakers and all the participants that came out today. Hope you found it valuable. And then also it'll be recorded. It was recorded and it'll be uploaded in about a week to the website and also emailed out. Anything else, Sue?
No, I don't have anything else.
All right. Thanks again.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.